Hey everyone, Oracle Data Redaction is a part of the Advanced Security License. So it comes in two parts. You've got transparent data encryption. Most of you guys, probably everybody here is aware of transparent data encryption. Data redaction is the other half of that advanced security option. Now, if you're in the cloud and you're using autonomous database, you have both automatically. If you're using XSCS, XSCC, if you're using DB database-based systems, the extreme or high performance, your license probably already includes the TD and data redaction. And then what data redaction allows you to do is just change the output of the data. We're not physically changing data on disk. We're not masking the data, right? We're not doing static data masking. We're doing a dynamic data masking. So doesn't change the actual data, just changes the output of the SQL. And you can do that dynamically by kind of knowing who the user is, what their IP address is, and other factors about the database. So the authorized user here may see the full credit card information, and our redacted display may only see the last four. So we can do this with data redaction without altering that physical data, the actual data itself. Today, I'm going to take you through using the PL SQL package DBMS redact. And that's what the script does for you. So how do you use it? All right, the first thing is identifying your sensitive data. So like Nazia said, you can use DBSAT. That can be included in AutoVault and Database Firewall, or you can use Oracle Data Safe. But we need to know what sensitive data we have in the database in order to mask that data. So let's say we discover dates of birth, we discover social security numbers, social identifier numbers, email addresses, or credit card, or account numbers that we want to mask, right? So we want to identify this data first, and then we want to decide how we want to mask it, what we want to do with that data. Data redaction provides four common, and we'll talk about a couple more here in a minute, types of ways to redact that data. So if we took our date of birth, maybe we just want to redact it down to January 1st, 2001, right? That's what we want all those dates to be, so everyone knows, oh, that's a redacted value, and they don't think of it as the real value there. Maybe we just want to partially redact the data. We just want to show the last four of the credit card, the social security number, the account number, whatever it is. We just want to do a partial redaction there. Maybe we have things that are a little different here, right? Where that first name, last name isn't a fixed length, so we want to use regular expressions to redact. But sometimes that first name, last name is not always the same, and we just want to redact whatever is before the @ symbol, and we can do that with data redaction regular expression functions. And then maybe we just want to do a random redaction too. So we know that number is there, and we know we just want to say, okay, whatever it is, we want to redact it randomly. So every time a query comes up, we just want to know, all right, it's just going to give us whatever non-real value it gives us for that column on that particular query. And how we get started is we first need to create kind of the user and grant the appropriate privileges. So what I do in my demonstration is we're going to grant read on these sys objects. Now I'm going to grant read on redaction policies so I can see the redaction policies that are available. I'm going to grant read on redaction columns so I can see what columns have redaction policies. Redaction expressions, we'll talk about that when we get to named policy expressions and what they do for us. And then the last one is what the redaction value is when it fully redacts. Is it a 0? Is it a null? Is it a January 1st, 2001? And we can change that. And we do that in the lab, that hands-on lab that I talked about. But we want to do that. And then we need to grant the user execute on the PL SQL package. Okay. In 23 AI, we've introduced a little more control here where we want to grant administer redaction policies so they can actually administer these policies on the objects. The last privilege that I may or may not want to grant is this exempt redaction policy, okay? This exempt redaction policy means that the user who runs the query is exempt from the redaction policy. So they will see actual data every time they run the query, right? We want to use that extremely sparingly because it is a high-level privilege. And plus, it gets audited, right? It gets audited because any use of a privilege like that, it's like, well, hold on a second, who is using that and who is accessing data that has a redaction policy associated with it? And we want to audit that behavior, that use of that exempt redaction policy. Okay, so use very sparingly. Just know that sys and system, they have this privilege by default. So once we've created our user, we want to create our policy. And in this example, we've got our add policy statement here. So we're going to add policy. We're going to add it on SH1. We are going to add it to the customers table, and we're going to give this policy a name, something simple here like redact sensitive data. And then what we're going to do is we're going to apply our expression here. So we are going to redact data for all users that are not SH1. In this example, when we start, we're going to say where 1 equals 1, so we can redact data for any user who queries the data who does not have that exempt policy admin system privilege. So this is how we get started with data redaction. We create the policy, we choose the schema, we choose the table, we give it a name, and then we tell it under what conditions are you going to redact data. We're going to redact data whenever the session user is not SH1. What we do next, I'm going to add this customer marital status column to it. And then I'm going to add it to the policy with this add column function. And then I'm going to fully redact, right? I'm going to fully redact what that is, what data gets returned to the end user there. So, and we'll talk about what that means. It can return a varchar, it can return a space, it can return, the date. It can return a null value. It depends on what type of function we use in there. When we use full, it's going to return just, let's say, a space if it's a varchar or a char value, okay? So let me talk about the different types that we can put in there, okay? We can put in none. That doesn't do us much good, but it does help you get started with your policy creation if you want. It doesn't redact any data. So it goes through the process, but doesn't actually redact any of the data. The next one is nullify, right? So if we want to redact 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it'll redact it to null. And why that matters is by default with full data redaction, it's going to redact it to the data type that the column is, right? So if it's a number data type, it's going to redact it to 0. If it's a character or a varchar data type, it's going to redact it to a single space. You could change that. But it's going to give you that ability with full to redact it to the appropriate data type. Nullify says, okay, I just want to redact it to null. I don't really care. I'm not processing that data type on the remote end where I'm looking for a specific number, varchar, date, time, anything like that, okay? Now, there's going to be times where you say, well, I don't want to redact things fully. I just maybe want to do some partial redaction. I just want to hide maybe the last 4 of the social security number here. You can do that. Data redaction gives you this partial capability, but the caveat is that your data must remain fixed. So this works great for credit cards. This works great for social identifiers, numbers, columns that have that fixed length, and you know what that's going to be every time. It doesn't work so great when you're talking about email addresses or things that could remain, that could be a variable length there. For that, we've offered regular expression redaction. We can redact columns with regular expression. Say that 10 times fast. Let's say, for example, the email address, right? We want to maybe put redact in it instead of the user email address. So the final one here we're going to talk about is redacting on a random basis. So if we've got a char, it's going to redact it to a same length of a char. If we've got a varchar, it's going to redact it and replace it with a random assortment of alphanumeric characters of whatever the actual data length is. We've got numbers, it's going to redact it to a non-negative random number. And then with date, it's going to redact it to a random kind of cis-generated number there that doesn't include that original value, okay? What data types does this apply to, right? Like what can I redact within the Oracle database, okay? The good news is for full redaction, you can redact most built-in data types. So you can say, hey, I want to fully redact blobs, booleans, chars, clobs, numbers, date, timestamps, varchars, etc. So full redaction is available for most of the built-in data types that Oracle provides. Same thing with the nullify, right? So the nullify here is available as well for most of the built-in Oracle data types we provide. Where we get into a little bit of a gray area is this in between, right? So if we look at blobs, nothing for partial, nothing for regular expression, nothing for random. Because a blob is a binary object, I'm not really sure what we should replace it with or partially replace it. So we just don't get into that. For varchars, yes. For partial, yes. For regular expression, yes. For random. For clobs, same thing. It may not make sense if we do partial, but we could do regular expression, right? Because it can be a variable length. We can offer you regular expression redaction because it is that variable length versus partial. Random, no, I'm not really sure what I could randomize your clob to, so we don't offer that, okay? But you can go through, and what I'd encourage you to do is to take a look at this new documentation we've published. Let's get to some examples here. Now remember, these examples are available on my GitHub repository, and you're going to probably want to do it against a 23.6 cloud database. That'd be easier. But you could do some of the basic redaction, these things in this section against your 19C database as well. Yeah. All right. We're going to create a new table called T1. This table has all sorts of sensitive data that you probably won't see in one table. But for example purposes, we've jammed it all into one table, and we're going to work with this. We've got char, we've got varchar, we've got dates, we've got numbers. So we've got a good distribution of the standard data types that you work with in a database. And we're going to create a policy associated with it, okay? So this policy, we're just saying it's redact T1, and we're going to want to redact everything. So every user who queries this table sees redacted data, except for those users who have exempt policy access, exempt redaction policy there. We don't want them querying that data. Maybe we use Database Vault to block their access, okay? And then the first thing you're going to do is say, hey, I want to go check what the redaction policies show me so I can see what redaction policies we have out there. And you can see here that we've just got one right now, okay? So we've got it out there, it's enabled, but we haven't applied this to any columns yet, right? We've created the policy, and now we want to apply it to columns, and we want to choose how we redact the data in those columns. So the first one we're going to do is nullify, right? We're going to start with Emily Jones. We see her first name when we query the column. We apply this redaction policy there by saying add column, and we choose the function type here, which is nullify. So we've nullified that column. Next time you query it, you're going to see no data, right? You're just going to see a null that comes back. So we've hidden that first name as a first example. You're like, well, okay, I can see some use in nullify, for various situations. But what about random? Maybe I want to randomize that number instead. So we get something back. So in the example, let's randomize the Amex column, right? So same user, Jones, Amex. So we can see we've got our Amex. We've got the add column again. We said add column. We are adding in the Amex column, and this time we're choosing redaction of random instead. So we're going to randomly generate a numerical value here. For characters or varchars, it'll generate a random alphanumeric value instead. So if we'd done this for first name or last name, you'd see random characters in there. And for dates, it generates a random date, right? So instead, we're going to see the Amex number look like this. If you run this query 10 times, you'll probably see 10 different numbers here. If you say, well, random is a little weird, Rich, I don't necessarily want to just randomly generate my numbers. I've got an account number, and if it was random, that'd look weird. It wouldn't really maybe follow our format. That's okay. So if we've got a fixed length varchar column, we can say we want to redact it from this value here, ending in 3579, to end in just 4 X's instead. And the way we do that is by using the partial redaction function here, right? So we're going to partially redact this data, and we're going to provide it with the format we have for our data. So we know our data is this length. So over here, you can see the input value we want to be able to redact all the variables here. So they're all V's, and our output format is going to be all V's as well. And we want to replace that mask character, that character, with an X. You could do an asterisk, you could do an and, you could do a question mark, you could do just kind of about anything you want in there. And we want to start this at the 9th character, including the 9th character, all the way through the 12th, right? So that's how we end up down here with this redaction, this partial redaction policy on the account number, okay? But if you're doing it on a column data type that is something we know, like a visa, for example, here you can see that the functional parameter isn't something that you specified here. It is something that comes out of our built-in library. So we've got a built-in library of some of these most common functions that you can use on your data. So in reality, what this one is here's the original data. Here's the input parameter that we've pre-created for you. Here's the output parameter that we've pre-created for you. And you can see here that there's an F in the middle instead of a V, right? So these Fs are those dashes, and we want to leave them alone. Those are like our fixed characters that we want to leave. And so we've got them here for you and that you can keep. So, and instead of masking with a X, we're going to choose to mask with the percent symbol instead. So we went from seeing full data to adding a partial redaction policy using our built-in format to only seeing the last 4 of the credit card information here. So that function parameter is one of several that we offer for you that are built in for partial redaction policies here. We found that these are kind of the most common column data, the most common column data that customers want to redact. So we've got these built-in function parameters for you to use with partial data redaction. Okay. Now you're saying, well, Rich, I've got email addresses and that's not a fixed format. That's not an account number. That's not a credit card. I want to redact some of this too. Cool. Let's use regular expression redaction to do this. Okay. Now this looks a little hairy, right? Like this looks a little overwhelming for you, but let's break it down so we can understand what's going on. So we're using a regular expression redaction here, and then we're giving it our pattern, okay? And then our pattern over here on the right explains that this first portion means 1 or more characters, right? And then we see the @ symbol, and then we do 1 or more characters. That would be the domain. And then we see a dot. So we know there's a dot in there somewhere. And then we know that there's 2 to 4 characters after the dot that are A to Z, capitalized or not, right? So we are breaking our email address down into different portions. So we've got the first portion, Emily Jones, which is 1 or more characters. We've got an @ symbol that is contained in every email address. And then we've got the domain and then .com, .net, .co, .uk, whatever it is, we've got it that we can capture there, okay? Then what we do is we choose our replacement string, right? We are dropping the word redacted in there, and then we are taking everything after the @ symbol and leaving it there. So our \2 refers to this second capture group, which in this is example.com. It could be example.co.uk, could be oracle.com, whatever it is, we are grouping it together. So we leave it there as a part of the redacted output. Okay. So we go from emily.jones at example.com to redacted at example.com. Now, if you say, look, I'm really not comfortable with those, Rich, I just have a few columns that I want to work on. Let's do it. Let's use our built-in capabilities instead, right? So instead of trying to figure out what that format looks like, we're going to modify our redaction and we're going to redact that email address using our built-in patterns. So we've got regular expression redaction. We've got our regular expression pattern email address. We're telling it what that email, what that column data is. It's an email address. And we're telling it what we want to redact. We want to redact the email name. So the first half of the email, not the domain, the email address, the user itself. So instead of redacted or instead of Emily Jones, we're going to see 4X's. That's how this built-in pattern redacts that data for you. Okay. So we've covered nullifying, we've covered partial redaction, we've covered regular expression redaction, but there's going to be times where you want to redact columns where you may or may not want to redact the column based on maybe where that user is coming from. Okay. So each table, view, or materialized view can have one data redaction policy. That data redaction policy has an overall expression associated with it. We can create a named policy expression that overrides that default expression of 1 = 1. So what we're doing here is we're creating a named policy expression saying redact unless your analytics, this SH user, maybe, right? So redact everybody unless you're the sales history user, where that default policy we created originally was redact for everybody, right? So we're not changing the default, but what we're doing is we're creating an option to apply this to different columns. So we still have that one policy, and then we pick the columns we want to redact. But what we want to say is there's 1 or 2 columns that these other users should be able to see without a redaction policy associated with it. So we're able to kind of divide how we redact or who we redact for in the operation. So let's check this out. Okay, so we've redacted all this data, right? We've redacted account number, first name, last name, email, and that visa number. And you say, well, I may want to get that full visa. I may want to get that full account number. I may want to see full data there. So what we do is we apply this redaction expression to the visa column that has a redaction policy associated with it. And we're going to change when it gets redacted. So it's redacted unless you're SH1. So we're going to override that default 1 = 1 expression with our own that we created. So now instead of only seeing the last 4 of the credit card with the column number, we can see the entire credit card number here. So SH1 sees full data here, right? Instead of all of the asterisks and only the last 4. This might be useful for your supervisors. This might be useful for certain reports where you need to see that data. This might be useful in certain situations where you're coming from a server we trust and we want you to see full data. But for everybody else, we want to redact as much as possible. So think about some different scenarios that you could use this named policy expression for. To kind of summarize, hey, read-only static pages are good. API gets are good. You can do queries, joins, unions, kind of any advanced analytic query that you want to do to get that data is supported. When we get into applications, a little bit of caution there for dashboards, reports, or anything that might write data back. Anything with active data pages where it would write that data back, we don't want to use data redaction in those circumstances. We want to exempt those users from that redaction and let the application control it there, right? And again, DBAs have the privilege to bypass application data redaction because they could have that exempt redaction policy. And then it's not an alternative to VPD, database vault, or masking. Masking is for dev and test. Redaction is for like your production databases where we just don't want to show the results in the query to that end user. We've got this new lab out there you can do on a free tenancy for Oracle data redaction. So you can spin up a 23 AI free. You can go through the lab. You can get your hands on kind of the new capabilities in Oracle Database 23.6 for Oracle data redaction.